Hi, I'm Alexia Lopes, and I'm an assistant professor at St. Norbert College, and I'm delighted to present the project No Tits in the Pits, an exploratory research of female leaders in motorsports, which I worked in collaboration with my advisor, Dr. Haley Mercado, an associate professor at the University of South Carolina. My motivation for this study comes from my personal background. I grew up in a racing family, and my brother is a professional motocross and supercross rider in the United States. And I grew up basically working as a career manager for him. And I always notice a lot of women on the pits, moms, sisters like me, but also female fans. However, when I was dealing with sponsors or sanctioning bodies, or different organizations in the space, I never really encountered women working for such organizations, and especially not in management positions, and that always intrigued me. But before I got context specific to motorsports, I started my research by looking at parent disciplines, mainly management and psychology. And I did find that women are more and more entering the labor force, and they are actually earning more higher degrees than men are in the United States. However, women who were over 50% of the US population in 2020 made up only 5.8% of CEOs in S&P 500 companies. More and more, I realized there was a disconnect. Although women are entering the labor force and they're qualified, they're not making to the decision-making roles or important leadership positions, even though several researchers point out the benefits of welcoming more women in such high top positions in organizations. From the consumer standpoint, women are also very powerful. They make, for example, 85% of household purchasing decisions, and from a motorsport specific standpoint, there are actually 42% of NASCAR fans in Formula One and 44% of Formula One fans. I decided then to investigate the challenges that women face in moving towards decision-making roles or top positions in organizations. This slide presents a summary of my literature review and presents challenges which are well developed and well researched, especially in management and psychology, with regards to the challenges women face in management. These challenges were organized among the 4 levels proposed in the analytical framework developed by Regis and Sundstrom, 1989, which help illustrate that women face challenges in different levels. They face challenges at the individual, at the interpersonal, organizational, and societal levels. However, I found a gap in literature. Although we know a lot about the challenges women face, we don't know much about the experience of women who made it to decision-making roles. We don't know much about the success factors and coping mechanisms they used. I also found some gaps in literature, specifically in sports management. Studies in this field that looked at the experiences of women in leadership roles tended to look at the experiences of coaches and concentrate on the context of college athletics. With all that said, the purpose of this study was to identify the challenges women on the management side of US motorsports encountered throughout their careers and the coping mechanisms they used to navigate and overcome those challenges. With the purpose of the study in mind, 2 research questions were proposed. The first research question reads, what are the main challenges women encounter on the management side of motorsports in the United States? And the second one, how do women navigate and overcome these challenges? In order to answer those questions, for the data collection, I recruited women who are decision makers, and that is, who have roles such as director, owner, managers in motorsports in the United States. So motorsports are those sports that involve the use of motorized vehicles, and participants worked across the different series in the country, such as IndyCar and NASCAR, and across different types of organizations, such as sanctioning bodies, tracks, and teams. 16 women took part in this study, and the interviews lasted between 45 and 75 minutes, and they were conducted over a 3-week period. They were conducted over Zoom, given travel and time constraints, and data collection stopped when we reached saturation of information and themes were well developed. This slide presents the table with information about participants, and I wanted to highlight and stress that this is the strongest point of this entire research project, because we were able to recruit the top women in motorsports in the United States today. The women who took part in this study are definitely the most influential women on the management side of motorsports in the United States. I wanted to highlight that they have an average of 22 years of experience in motorsports, and their roles vary between director, VP, CFO, CEO, owner, and so on. Most of them have at least a bachelor's degree, several of them have masters, and one of the participants has a doctorate too. Moving towards the data analysis, all interviews were recorded and then transcribed verbatim, and I'm gonna next talk about the thematic analysis conducted, and between interviews, a constant comparison was conducted by the main researchers as well. For the thematic analysis, individual coding was used, and in this inductive analysis, codes that followed the same pattern were clustered in themes, and each theme was therefore supported by multiple perspectives of participants. And I wanted to highlight that these themes then, they reflect participants' descriptions of their own lived experiences as they wish to share. In this slide, I wanted to present a snapshot of our findings, and those themes are organized among the 4 levels advanced by Raggings and Sundstrom 1999, and this organization allows us to compare our findings to previous studies. Moreover, I wanted to point out that the items with a minus represent challenges and answer research question 1, and the items with a plus represent coping mechanisms, and those answer research question 1.1. Please note that the strongest challenges were the societal and individual levels, and they were mostly an enactment of gender stereotypes, whereas the coping mechanisms were pretty obviously mostly concentrated between interpersonal and individual levels. Given the time constraint of this presentation, I selected only a few quotes to illustrate the emerging themes in our findings. With regards to research question 1, the challenges, gender stereotypes was mentioned by 13 of the 16 participants in the study. I selected a quote by Kaya, who said that there's always going to be people who think that women aren't smart enough, that they're not fast enough, and that they are not savvy enough, that they don't understand cars. For research question 1.1 and the coping mechanisms these women use to succeed in their careers in motorsports, I selected a quote from Isla's interview where she highlights how important male allies were in her career. She specifically talks about a boss that set the tone at the organization she was working for, set the tone for everyone in the organization to treat her like a sister. Another success factor was highlighted by Deanna among other participants, to be the personality of those working in motorsports. They talked about people in motorsports being overachievers and type A personalities. With regards to research question 1, most of the challenges that we found were at the societal and individual levels, and pretty much all of them were either an enactment or related to gender stereotypes, which is a similar finding to Pels et al. 2015. However, I wanted to stress that gender stereotypes are manifested differently or experienced differently in sports. So as Kaya's quote illustrated, women in sports, they are also judged for not knowing cars enough or not having competed in the sports they work for. Interestingly, the early socialization into sports was important for women not to perceive gender differences as strongly as compared to those women who were introduced to sports later. That is, women who grew up in racing families, they didn't perceive gender differences to be as strong. The findings that answer research question 1.1 also matched and were similar to previous studies, in which the coping mechanisms women tend to use are mostly informal and at the interpersonal and individual levels. I wanted to also highlight that those coping mechanisms were strongly associated with the emotional attachment to sports, which reflects in this sense of belonging and sense of community, which is particular to sports, and is similar to the feeling that sports fans have and has been previously studied. Framework implications, we extended the Raggins and Sundstrom's 1989 framework to account for contextual experiences of women in motorsports. From a practical standpoint, we wanted to offer a couple implications. I will highlight a couple of those points. First of all, the early socialization of women into racing could help counter stereotypes of or gender differences in this environment. Secondly, by exposing women, such as in TV series as The Drive to Survive on Netflix, that could also help counter the perceived misfit of women in racing. And thirdly, providing a more welcoming environment for families during race weekends could also welcome more women who balance motherhood and their careers. We acknowledge that our study had limitations and we propose a number of future study opportunities in this not very well researched context of motorsports. Thank you so much for your attention.